The restaurant sat on the corner of Franklin Street, a place everyone in the Southside neighborhood of Graybridge knew belonged to Eli Walker. When the revolving door eased open and Eli stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted instantly. The servers who had been chatting fell silent. The chef behind the counter paused mid-motion. People eating at their tables lowered their eyes as if they sensed the presence of something larger than themselves. This was Eli's domain, and everyone understood it. He didn't have to raise his voice or give commands. A single glance from him was enough to bring order to the room. But then the door burst open, slamming against the frame as if someone had kicked it. The glass rattled once, sharp enough to make everyone turn. A young girl, looking as though she had been running for miles, stumbled inside. She was breathless, her face pale and streaked with tears, her clothes torn and stained with mud. She was just a child, small and fragile, but the terror in her wide eyes was far too old for her age. She was barefoot, her feet scratched and bleeding against the floor. She looked at no one, didn't stop at the front counter, didn't cry out for help. She ran straight toward Eli Walker, pushing past the confused guards whose hands twitched toward their holsters. She collapsed at Eli's table, her small hands gripping the lapel of his coat, holding on as if he were the last solid thing in her world. Her entire body shook violently, shattered by a fear she had carried for far too long. "He's coming," she sobbed, the sound barely squeezing past her tightening throat. "Please, he's coming." The restaurant froze. Every fork and knife went still. No one moved. No one dared breathe deeply. Eli lowered himself slowly, his eyes fixed on the girl's tear-soaked face. His voice was low and calm, but beneath that calm was something stirring, something old and dangerous. "Who?" he asked, soft as a breath, yet sharp enough to make those closest shiver. "Who is coming for you?" The girl pressed her lips together, lifted her face to him, and in her dark brown eyes was absolute terror. She whispered a name that made both guards curse under their breath, a name that had haunted Eli's family for 2 decades, a name he had been trained since childhood to destroy, a name that should have been forgotten long ago. Eli rose to his feet, the chair behind him toppling to the floor with a harsh crack. His eyes hardened, igniting with a cold, familiar fire that had not touched him in many years. Without a word of explanation, without a single question, without needing any detail at all, he walked out of the restaurant, his coat sweeping behind him. His inner circle moved after him in silence. One by one, without being called, they understood, because the name that had just been spoken was not a warning. It was a declaration of war. If you are still listening and something in this story has touched a quiet place inside your heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel, like and share this video so we can continue bringing you stories filled with emotion every day. And if you don't mind, may I ask where you're watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know where in the world this story has reached you. We cherish every word you share. Eli gave a small nod, and Troy and Paul stepped forward, gently easing the girl's fingers from his coat. She clung to him for one last second before Paul whispered reassuringly and wrapped a steady arm around her shoulders, supporting her weight as she could barely stand. He guided her gently but quickly toward the safe room behind the kitchen. As the door closed, the restaurant sank into a heavy silence, as if all sound had been pulled from the air. Eli remained still for a long moment, one hand braced against the wooden table, his head slightly bowed. He spoke the name he had just heard, barely above a whisper but clear enough to send a chill through everyone within earshot. Nathan Bishop. Those 2 words were sharp fragments of memory piercing through the calm life Eli had built. Nathan Bishop, a name meant never to be spoken aloud, never to be remembered, certainly never to appear in the quiet routine Eli had carved out in Graybridge. The staff, who had no idea what was happening, stood at a distance, watching with unease and something close to fear. To them, a frightened child had simply run in, but Eli's reaction said otherwise. He turned to Troy, his voice so low only the man inches away could hear it. "Ensure absolute protection for the child. No one enters, not even staff. Then lock all back doors and call Sarah immediately." Troy nodded and hurried away, the calm expression he usually wore replaced by the weight of worry. Paul stepped back beside Eli, eyes still fixed on the hallway leading to the safe room, and asked quietly, "Is it truly him?" Eli did not answer right away. He inhaled, long and slow, as if trying to tame something burning inside him. Then he said, each word falling heavy, "I have never mistaken anything about him." Paul swallowed hard, his hands curling into fists. The years had passed, but the memory of the last time that name had surfaced was as vivid as a wound that refused to heal. The restaurant now held only a handful of nervous staff members hastily wiping tables, though no one had told them to. They sensed the shift, sensed a storm gathering in the heart of their small city. Eli strode to the front door, locked it, and pulled the shades down. When he turned back, his eyes no longer held the gentle warmth he often showed to neighbors or customers. Instead, they gleamed with a controlled, sharp anger, frigid and precise. The girl said, "He is coming." That means he did not appear by accident. He is hunting someone, and he knows how to find this place. Paul asked, barely audible. Then why the child? Why would she come to you? Eli glanced down the hall toward the safe room. We will ask her. But first, we need to know if this is coincidence or a message sent directly to me. Either he has a new target, or he wants me to know he has returned. The second possibility drained the color from Paul's face. None of them wished for that, not after what had happened 20 years ago. Eli walked to the small sink by the wall and let cold water run across his hands. He looked at himself in the tiny mirror above it, seeing the face of a young man who had grown up too fast, with duty and pain etched into eyes that should have been youthful. Nathan Bishop had vanished from the world long ago, leaving behind no trace, no rumor, nothing but a shadow. People assumed he was dead or taken out by his own associates, but Eli had never believed it. Men like Bishop did not disappear unless they chose to wait. And tonight, when that terrified child whispered his name, Eli knew the silence of 2 decades had simply been the hush of a storm gathering strength. He dried his hands, took another steadying breath, and turned back with resolute eyes. We start tonight. Every source, every camera in this district, everything that can give us a trail. Paul nodded and left at once. Alone in the stillness of the restaurant, Eli whispered the name one final time, not to summon ghosts, but to remind himself this was real. Nathan Bishop. And from the moment that name escaped the lips of a desperate child, Eli knew the quiet days of Graybridge were over. The office behind the restaurant was lit only by a small desk lamp, its soft amber glow stretching long shadows across the walls. Eli closed the door behind him, the click of the lock cracking through the silence. He stood motionless for a moment, breathing deeply as if preparing to confront something he had avoided for years. On the low bookshelf to his right, an old wooden box rested beneath a thin layer of dust, untouched for a very long time. Eli reached for it, lowered it to the desk, and hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside lay a bundle of files tied with worn twine, the cover faded and marked with 2 words he had written himself long ago. The Bishop case. Only 2 words, yet they tightened something inside him. Eli loosened the twine and opened the file, the brittle pages whispering as they shifted, carrying the scent of age and memory. The first page held a photograph of a brown-haired girl with bright eyes and a radiant smile. Sarah Walker, his younger sister, only 14 at the time. Eli brushed his fingertips gently across her image. No one had seen that smile after what happened. He turned the page, finding photographs of other children, innocent faces that vanished without warning. Each picture was a stolen life, each name a wound borne by their grieving community. Toward the back of the file, the photographs darkened. Grainy images of the abandoned warehouse where Eli had first discovered the network's trail. Small iron beds, a heavy door locked from the outside, scratch marks on concrete walls, all of it carved permanently into his memory. But it was the single photo in the middle of the file that made Eli's knuckles go white as he clenched the paper. Nathan Bishop himself, captured before any charges were ever brought. His pale gray eyes stared straight into the camera, empty, depthless, devoid of humanity. His blonde hair combed neatly, his faint smile cold, calculated, as if he believed nothing in the world could escape his grasp. Eli remembered the first time he had seen that photo, the way something inside him had gone still, with primal certainty that this was not a man but a predator wearing a man's face. He turned page after page, reliving the years spent hunting the monster who had shattered his family. Pictures of Sarah when she was rescued, her face drained of color, her eyes hollow. Pictures of the rescue teams carrying trembling children out of that concrete tomb. Pictures of his father, bruised and bloody, and a blurry photo of a 5-year-old boy, Eli himself, standing helplessly behind the police tape, watching his sister being carried away. And at the back of the file lay a scrawled note. Eli had written the night Bishop vanished. He escaped. I can't believe he escaped. The entire operation had collapsed in a single night, but the man at its center had evaporated into the dark. No trail, no witnesses, no leads. Over the years, people convinced themselves Bishop was gone forever, dead, or buried by his own allies. But Eli never accepted that. Men like Bishop did not fade quietly. They waited, prepared, returned when the world was no longer expecting them. And tonight, when a child he had never met, a child with no reason to know his name, ran to him whispering Bishop's return, Eli understood that the past had not ended. It had merely gone silent, waiting for this moment. He closed the file, tied the twine again, placed everything back in the box, and shut the lid. As he stood, one truth settled heavy in his chest. The story from those years ago had never ended. It had only paused. Nathan Bishop had come back, and this time, Eli Walker would not allow him to disappear again. The safe room deep behind the kitchen had been built to protect staff during dangerous situations, but tonight it had become a refuge for a young girl trembling with exhaustion. When Eli stepped inside, Claire Bennett was curled up on a metal chair, her fingers interlocked so tightly they had turned pale. Though her face was still young, her eyes held the weary look of someone who had lived with fear for far too long. Her brown hair was disheveled, her cheeks streaked with drying tears, and unlike the frantic girl who had burst into the restaurant earlier, what remained now was only fatigue layered with the quiet, defensive posture of someone long haunted by the past. Eli stood a few steps away, never getting too close, careful not to startle her further. His breath was steady, his voice low and softened. "What is your name, child?" The girl lifted her face, her eyes wide, a few lingering tears gleaming under the dim light. Claire Bennett." Eli nodded and took the seat across from her. "I need to know what is happening to you, Claire. Why did you come here?" Claire drew in a shaky breath but didn't speak right away. She glanced around the silent room as if afraid someone else was lurking in the shadows. The quiet was so complete that even her controlled breath seemed loud. Finally, she whispered, the sound fragile, as if speaking too loudly might summon the very terror she was fleeing. "I heard him." Eli waited quietly, never urging her. Claire tightened her clasped hands, then continued. "He came near my house. Last night, when I was walking back home after my piano lesson. He didn't appear in front of me, but he spoke. I heard his voice right beside my ear, but when I turned there was no one there." She shuddered as the memory swept over her. That voice, I still remember it. It's haunted me since that day. 5 years ago. I saw him before. That sentence made Eli sit upright. "When did you meet him?" Claire dropped her gaze to the floor, her voice faltering. "When I was 7, at a summer music camp. They said he was a stranger passing through the area, but I knew he wasn't passing by chance. He stared at the kids. He called me over, said he had a studio at home and wanted me to try singing for him. I didn't understand, so I thought he was being kind. If my grandmother hadn't come early to pick me up that day..." Claire bit her lip until it bled. It took her a moment to speak again. "My grandmother said he looked at me in a way no normal person would. The next morning, the camp director said 2 other kids had gone missing. One was found a few miles away. The other never came home." "Sarah Walker," Eli murmured, not intending to say it aloud. Claire looked up when she heard the name, but Eli offered no explanation. He understood Bishop's patterns all too well. The man always targeted the lonely ones, the ones who still carried a spark of hope so he could extinguish it. Claire nodded faintly. "I thought he was gone. People said he was arrested or dead. I forced myself to believe it so I wouldn't have to live afraid anymore. But these last few weeks I've seen him near the middle school where I study. I saw him standing by the parking lot, then by the playground gate. The kids don't know danger, and I had no proof. No one believed me. He knows I recognized him. He knows I'm still alive. And tonight..." She inhaled sharply as tears spilled without restraint. "Tonight he was at my window. He couldn't get inside, but he spoke. He whispered like he did 20 years ago, with the same sweet voice that was cold as steel. He said he remembered me, that he wouldn't lose me again." A chill crept down Eli's spine. Every detail Claire described fit Bishop's hunting patterns perfectly. He didn't just want a new victim. He wanted to finish what he had once started. And if Claire was the only one who had ever recognized him and survived, then his presence at her window meant only one thing. He had chosen her. Eli fixed his gaze on Claire, his voice heavy as stone. "Why did you run here? Not to the police? Not to a hospital?" Claire lifted her tired but resolute eyes. "I came here because I was told you're the only person in this city who can make him disappear. I don't know who you are or what you've done, but the kids at school know. They say you protect the ones adults fail to protect. And tonight, I had no one else to trust." In that fragile moment, Eli Walker understood that the fate he thought he had buried was standing before him again. A child saved by luck in the past, a young girl now running to him out of desperation, and the monster who had never truly vanished. Claire Bennett was the missing piece of an old puzzle, and her presence meant Greybridge's nightmare had awakened once more. The sky outside had darkened by the time Eli guided Claire out of the restaurant through the back door, where Paul stood guard, scanning every corner of the alley. Claire had a kitchen coat draped over her shoulders, gripping the collar as though releasing it would leave her exposed. She stayed close to Eli, glancing behind her even though the alley was empty. Eli opened the door of his old pickup truck and motioned for her to get in. When the engine started, its deep growl filled the quiet street, offering a small, fragile sense of safety. As the night settled over Greybridge, they drove in silence at first. Claire watched the familiar houses pass by, but tonight they looked distant and foreboding. Finally she asked, her voice barely above a breath, "Where are we going?" Eli kept his eyes on the road leading toward the outskirts. "To the one person who can help you, the only one you can trust besides me." Sarah Walker lived in a small 2-story house tucked behind an abandoned church, far enough from town to avoid curious eyes but close enough to reach quickly. When the truck pulled into the gravel driveway, the front door opened before Eli even knocked. A woman with dark hair tied back and eyes that carried more history than most people lived in a lifetime stood in the doorway. Sarah saw Eli first, but her gaze shifted almost instantly to Claire, surprise and worry flickering in her expression. "Who is this girl?" Eli stepped onto the porch, his voice dropping. "Claire Bennett, he's back." Those 2 final words struck Sarah like a blow to the chest. For a moment her breath faltered, but like Eli, she had learned to bury the panic that had lived inside her for 20 years. She stepped aside, ushering them into the house. The interior resembled a secret operations room more than a home. Maps, files, and pinned notes covered the living room walls, photographs of missing children, small handwritten clues, red markings highlighting locations across the city. Claire stood in the center, overwhelmed by the weight of tragedies she could feel even without knowing the details. Sarah pulled out a chair for Claire, then crossed her arms, her voice unnervingly steady. "Where did you see him?" Claire recounted everything she had told Eli, though her voice trembled more this time, because Sarah's eyes held an understanding as deep as her own fear. When Claire described the whisper at her window, Sarah gripped the edge of the chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. "He wants to finish what he failed to do," Sarah whispered, almost to herself. "He always comes back for the ones he leaves unfinished." She drew a steadying breath and looked at Eli. If he let her live all these years, appearing now is not random. He's choosing his target. Eli nodded, his gaze darkening. "Not just choosing, preparing." Claire stared at them, confused. "Preparing what?" Sarah motioned for her to approach the large board on the wall, where red lines connected various points across Greybridge. "These are recent reports. Children missing. A strange man spotted near schools. Cars parked near playgrounds, leaving as soon as someone approached. We suspected something, but nothing connected. Not until tonight." Sarah picked up a sheet of paper from the table and set it in front of Claire. "A boy of about 7, missing for 3 days, no cameras, no witnesses." Claire's heart tightened at the sight. Sarah continued, her voice low and heavy. "When we first saw signs of someone lurking, I thought it might be a coincidence, some disturbed person trying to imitate the past. But Claire, you are the piece we never had. The only living person who saw him clearly and remembers him." Claire felt a coldness seep into her bones. "But why me?" Eli answered for Sarah. "Because you are the only one who ever escaped him without anyone realizing it. And for men like Bishop, unfinished business never sleeps." Claire stepped back, arms wrapping around herself. "He's rebuilding the network, isn't he?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, he never worked alone before. If he's resurfacing here in Greybridge, it means he has found new people to work with. Or worse, he already has a foundation in place." The air grew so heavy Claire struggled to breathe. There was no place left to hide, no quiet life she could return to. Sarah met her gaze, not with pity but with resolve. "You came to the right place. Whatever he is doing, whatever he is preparing, from this moment on, you are not facing him alone." Eli stood behind them, his expression darker than a moonless night. He knew better than anyone that Bishop's return was not merely a threat to Claire, but a declaration of war against all of Greybridge. And this time, there would be no shadow left for the monster to disappear into. Eli left Sarah's house just as the clock on the wall slipped into the hour when Greybridge began sinking into its nightly stillness. The wind pushed hard through the empty streets, carrying that cold, piercing feeling he remembered from countless nights spent searching for missing children long ago. Claire had been taken upstairs by Sarah to rest, while Eli returned to his truck, his eyes reflecting something he had not felt with such clarity in years. The old anger returning, hotter, sharper, and aimed with more certainty than ever before. He pulled out his phone and dialed the first number. Troy answered after 2 rings, his voice clipped and alert, as if he had been on standby for years. "What is it, Eli?" Eli did not waste a word. "He is back." Troy's silence lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough to show he understood exactly which man Eli meant. When Troy finally spoke, his voice dropped half an octave. "You're certain?" Eli replied with 3 words heavy as stone. "I never mistake him. Never." Troy drew in a breath, the sound of rapid keystrokes echoing faintly on the other end of the line. "I'll be there. Nothing more. No questions. No demands for details." The old hatred had lived in their blood too long to require explanation. The second call was to Jasmine, the only person in their group who had ever faced one of Bishop's men and lived to tell it. When Eli said the name, Jasmine didn't gasp or raise her voice. She simply asked with a tone flat as ice. "Where?" Eli answered plainly. "Sarah's house." "Bring your full kit," Jasmine replied at once. 30 minutes. The final call was to Paul, the eldest among them, a former police officer who had left the force after Bishop's case was closed without answers and without justice. When Eli told him, Paul went silent for long, aching seconds, as though holding back something sharp and hollow in his chest. Eli heard the weighted exhale of a man who had lost his only son to Bishop, a grief he never named, because naming it would tear him open again. When Paul spoke at last, his voice trembled, but the steel inside it remained unbroken. "Tell me when," Eli said simply. 1 hour, Haven Project. Paul breathed out, a shuddering release that felt like a decision 20 years in the making. "All right, I'll be there." 1 hour later, in the secret meeting room behind Sarah's storage hall, the 3 of them arrived almost simultaneously. No greetings were exchanged. No one asked how the others had been. No one pretended the past was behind them. Each walked in carrying a look like a long-starved fire finally given oxygen. Troy set up his laptop in front of the large screen, connecting to the network of hidden cameras he maintained throughout parts of the city. Jasmine placed a hard plastic case onto the table and opened it, revealing tracking devices, micro-recorders, and thermal observation lenses. Paul stood against the wall, his fingers interlaced, the harsh overhead light carving deep shadows over his lined face. His eyes held the fury of a man who had lost everything. When Eli entered, all 3 looked toward him, waiting for the opening words they knew would change the course of everything that followed. He stood before them, the light behind him casting a long shadow across the wall, just as he had stood before them 20 years ago. Back when none of them understood how deep Bishop's darkness truly ran. This time, his voice was not that of a man searching for the truth, but of a man preparing to end it. "Tonight," Claire Bennett heard him outside her window. Jasmine frowned. "Who is Claire Bennett?" Eli answered without pause. "The only surviving victim he failed to take from the music camp." Paul cursed under his breath, and Troy whipped around, his eyes sharp. "He knows she is alive?" Eli nodded. "And he is coming back to finish what he started." No one spoke. No one needed to. Old fear, old rage, old wounds, all of it became real again tonight. Jasmine broke the silence first. "If he's back in Graybridge, then he is building a new network. He never acted alone." Paul's hands tightened until the knuckles blanched. "So what's our plan this time?" Eli looked at each one of them, his gaze heavy, resolute. "We hunt him before he touches another child, and this time, he does not disappear." The room fell into a brief, dense quiet, and then one by one the others nodded, not in fear, not in doubt, but with the simple certainty that the war they thought had ended 20 years ago was only beginning now. Claire descended the stairs, her eyes still slightly swollen, and froze when she saw the 4 of them gathered in the Haven Project meeting room. The air felt weighted, as if every breath carried the weight of decades of loss. Eli stepped toward her, his voice softening. "Claire, we need you to tell us everything you remember. Every detail matters." Claire swallowed hard and sat before the large screen where Troy displayed a map of the city. The blue glow cast across her face made the red around her eyes more pronounced, yet there was a new steadiness in her expression. She drew a breath. "Everything began about 3 weeks ago. I had just finished school at Ridgeview Elementary. The kids were running toward the gate like any other day, and I was gathering my lesson materials. When I looked up, I saw him across the street, standing by the lamppost. He didn't hide. He didn't pretend. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking into the schoolyard." Claire glanced at Troy to make sure she wasn't imagining it. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the children. No one spoke, but every person in the room felt the cold truth of it. Claire continued, The second time I looked, he was gone. But the next day, he was there again. And the day after that. Every time, he stood a little closer. Jasmine leaned forward. Did you ever see his face clearly? Claire shook her head. Never close enough for that. He always stayed just far enough to make me doubt myself. But his posture, the way he held his head, the way he observed like he was calculating exactly like before. She entwined her fingers until her nails dug into her skin. Then I thought I was imagining things. Until Saturday night I was waiting for the bus near my home. When I looked into the reflection of the bus stop glass, I saw someone reflected in the rearview mirror, standing in the shadows near the station. Claire paused, her voice trembling. His silhouette, the way he held still. But this time he turned toward me. When I looked straight at him, he stepped back into the dark and disappeared. Paul nodded once, confirming what he already suspected. He was testing you, checking if you recognized him. Claire's breaths grew heavier, every memory making her colder. I still tried to convince myself I was overreacting, but then... Claire opened her phone, her fingers slightly shaking as she scrolled through her emails. She handed it to Eli. This is what made me certain he had returned. On the screen was a subjectless email sent from an untraceable address. Inside was only one sentence, a single line of song. The line the children at the music camp had heard him repeat with eerie devotion. Not higher than the wind, not lower than ashes. I will take you to a place no one will ever find you. Troy scanned the line and immediately photographed it for records. This line, he said, does not appear in any children's song or music archive. Claire nodded firmly. Exactly. He used it to lure the kids. I heard it once and never forgot. He knows that. He knows I would recognize it. Jasmine folded her arms, her gaze sharpening. He did not send it to anyone else. No threats, no public display, which means he wants to play the old hunting game. Eli finished the thought, and he wants Claire to know he's back. Paul walked to the wall map and pinned a red marker at the gas station. Troy zoomed in on the digital map, adding markers for Ridgeview Elementary and Claire's route home. Gradually, a crescent-shaped pattern emerged, surrounding nearly every place she walked in the past weeks. Troy glanced at Eli. He didn't appear by chance. He has been tracking her for weeks. Claire lowered her head, her voice rough. I know. I've felt his eyes on me. Even when I couldn't see him, it felt like he stood only a few steps away, like he wanted to remind me I was unfinished business. Eli leaned forward, resting his hand on the table, looking directly at her. You did well. You didn't miss anything. Claire lifted her head. But that means he's preparing for... Eli answered without hesitation. Yes, for what he once did. And this time, he isn't targeting only you. The room filled with a thick, suffocating silence. But in that silence, Bishop's pattern revealed itself. He watched from a distance, tested reactions, sent a message, marked his target, then widened his circle. Claire stared at the 3 red markers on the map, then looked back at Eli. I don't know what he intends next, but I know one thing. He won't stop. Eli nodded, his eyes darkening further. No one in the room doubted it. Bishop had never stopped, and now the shadows he once bred had materialized into a truth no one could deny. The hunt had officially begun. Troy pulled his swivel chair closer to the larger monitor, his fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard as he accessed the network of security cameras he had spent years installing throughout the city. Those silent electronic eyes, which usually captured the rhythms of ordinary life in Graybridge, were now the very tools they needed to track the man they had once believed gone forever. Claire sat beside Eli, her hands clenched on her lap, torn between wanting to see immediate proof and fearing what would appear on the screen. Troy opened a sequence of videos from the areas surrounding Claire's home over the past 3 weeks. The clips rolled, rewound, zoomed, filtered steps that were routine for him, yet tonight every flicker of movement carried a deadly weight. Here, Troy said, pausing at a late afternoon recording. A gray car sat parked 2 blocks from Claire's house. The car was unremarkable. No shine, no stickers, nothing that called attention, exactly the kind of vehicle a seasoned hunter would choose. Troy enlarged the image, stopping on the blurred license plate. Pennsylvania-style plate, but the characters were almost impossible to read. The next video showed the same gray car near Ridgeview Elementary, several days before Claire first noticed the figure standing at the school gate. Each time the car appeared, it lingered only minutes before leaving again, never hurried, never staying long enough to seem suspicious. Paul folded his arms and stepped closer. A car stopping like that near a school at dismissal, with no record of the driver getting out, That's him, careful the way only he is. Troy nodded and switched to the next clip. In the second week, the car appeared near the gas station, where Claire had seen the silhouette retreat behind the wall. When the footage reached the moment she opened her car door to drive off, the gray vehicle's brake lights flared. Then it slipped into a side alley as if deliberately avoiding being noticed. Claire felt her body go cold even inside the warm room. He had been there, close enough to touch her. Jasmine spoke softly, but tension sharpened her words. This isn't random behavior. He's surveying her environment, and not just once. Troy narrowed his eyes. He knows how to avoid cameras, but not all of them. I filtered every appearance of this car within 15 blocks of Claire's home. The computer processed for less than a minute before a long list appeared. 27 appearances in 3 weeks. Claire went pale. Eli stood behind her, his gaze darkening as he studied the list. Not casual surveillance. This is premeditated hunting. Troy moved on to the license search. He fed the enlarged plate image into the recognition software. I tried to sharpen it. The result displayed 4 numbers and 2 letters. The vehicle was a rental. Troy frowned and opened the rental record. The name on the contract was unfamiliar. Dylan Marsh. No tax records, no living documents. The listed address belonged to an abandoned house falling apart years ago. Paul grunted. Not real. That's the kind of temporary identity he likes. Troy typed several lines of code and let out a bitter laugh. The company behind the rental agreement is Westbrook Allied Services. Jasmine lifted her head immediately. Westbrook? Isn't that the same company he used years ago? Troy rotated the screen toward them. Yes. 20 years ago, before he vanished, Bishop used that same shell company to open bank accounts, pay for storage units, buy trucks, all of it under Westbrook's cover. Miss Bennett, he said, pulling up an old document from their archive. Back then, Westbrook was dissolved when the police investigated. But now it looks like it's alive again. Claire leaned back, her breath stuttering. It's not just him coming back. He's rebuilding everything. Eli closed his eyes for the briefest second and then opened them. Colder, sharper than before. If Westbrook is active again, he has someone working behind the scenes. He didn't return alone. He is reconstructing his network. Paul tapped the table with his hand, not out of anger, but from the dawning horror of understanding. That means he has money, manpower, a place to hide, and a plan. Troy continued scanning the videos. A few times the car appeared in areas Claire had never mentioned, but still within the radius Bishop preferred when scouting targets. Troy stopped at one frame. Here 3 weeks ago. The car parked outside a derelict building in the north end. He went inside. Another camera angle captured a figure stepping out of the car. The face was unclear, but the posture. Claire sucked in a sharp breath. That's him. It has to be him. Eli placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, a silent reassurance that she wasn't facing this alone. Troy looked at the others. This is only the first thread. But if we follow it, Eli finished for him, his voice firm as stone. We'll find where he's hiding. And the people helping him. Because this time, he doesn't get to disappear again. Troy expanded the camera search, pulling footage from adjacent streets and cross-connecting known locations. Each clip that passed deepened the tension in the room. No one spoke, but every gaze remained fixed on the screen, as if watching the tracks of a predator circling their city. When Troy paused at footage from Riverside High School, the entire room leaned forward. Students were spilling out after class, laughing and running across the parking lot, but in the far right corner, behind the fence, the familiar gray car sat again. Next came a shot of a young boy stepping off a bus on Willow Street. The gray car crawled behind him, keeping enough distance to avoid suspicion, close enough to observe. Then a recording from Maplewood's neighborhood field showed 2 kids kicking a soccer ball. Unaware that a few dozen yards away, the gray car waited, engine off, stayed for 3 minutes, then rolled away. Troy pinned each spot on the map, the red markers multiplying, and finally, footage from the alley near the north end abandoned building showed the shadowed figure stepping out again, this time staring into an empty playground at dusk. He is not only watching Claire, Jasmine said, her voice tight. He is selecting other children, several of them. Paul studied the map, his expression hardening, his eyes storm dark. 5 children, Paul said heavily. Enough for him to test his methods again. Troy added another red pin before glancing toward Eli. None of these children belong to wealthy families. None have consistent supervision, perfect targets for him. Claire leaned against the wall, both arms wrapped around herself as she stared at the spreading red marks. The map of Graybridge now looked like a city bleeding through tiny wounds. Eli stepped forward and began marking each point. His voice was low, sharp as a blade. He's not picking randomly. He's testing reactions from the community, from the police, from us. Nathan Bishop always tested before he acted. Paul nodded grimly. He's checking whether Graybridge is still blind like it was 20 years ago. Jasmine folded her arms, her eyes sharp as needles. Or checking whether we are still here. That thought pulled the room into a deeper silence. Claire looked from the map to Eli, confusion and fear swirling with a rising resolve. At the music camp, he did the same thing. Found several kids, chose one he left unfinished, then tried to repeat the cycle. Eli nodded. Exactly. He didn't return just to harm a single victim. He wants the entire hunting pattern rebuilt. Every child, every corner, every route mapped. He's surveying the territory. Troy pulled up the satellite overlay. If we connect all locations, he drew thin lines between the red pins. Paul moved closer as a shape emerged, a wide arc, then another, until the pattern resembled a spiral encircling the western half of the city, its center point, the abandoned building where he had been seen. Jasmine whispered, "It's territorial marking, like a predator mapping where he'll place his traps." Claire stepped back as a chill ran down her spine. He's rebuilding everything. The same model. But why now? Eli exhaled slowly, his voice turning weighty, deliberate. Because now no one remembers him anymore. No one except me, and no one except you. And he believes that is enough for him to begin again. Paul tightened his fists. He's testing the city's response, which means if no one notices, he will move to the next step. Troy enlarged the map and circled the densest cluster. If I'm right, this area is his focus. He's identifying the easiest place to strike. Claire stared at the clusters of red pins, her heart sinking. Cheap housing streets, empty playgrounds, quiet alleys, places where a missing child might not be noticed right away. Eli braced his hands on the table, his voice falling into a somber verdict. He's testing again. Identifying targets, studying the environment, marking escape routes. We have his map now. There is no doubt. Graybridge is not the only name on his list. This entire city is becoming Bishop's new hunting ground. And unless they stopped him now, those red pins would no longer be warnings. They would become faces missing, lost, just like 20 years ago. Claire stared at the map crowded with red pins for a long time, as if she were looking at a younger version of herself standing among those children. Eventually she lowered herself into the nearest chair, her hands resting on her thighs, her palms damp with sweat. No one spoke. No one urged her on. Eli simply pulled a chair closer, close enough for her to feel his presence behind her, but not so near that it would press on her. Claire drew a deep breath, then began, her voice so soft it nearly dissolved into the air. "I've never told anyone about this except my grandmother. But if it helps everyone understand him, I'll say everything." Jasmine nodded gently. The steel in her expression softened into something sympathetic. Claire looked down at her hands, and her story began to spill out, like a wound reopening after years of being locked shut. "I was 7 years old. The summer music camp was where I went because my mother wanted me to continue learning music. I didn't like it much, but my grandmother said music kept children away from bad things." Claire let out a small, sad smile before she continued. "That day we were dismissed early. I was sitting under the tree behind the hall, practicing the song we'd been assigned. That was the first time he appeared in front of me. He wore a white shirt, dark pants, his hands in his pockets, walking toward me as if he belonged there." Claire closed her eyes briefly, her voice sinking. "He told me he was checking the summer program, that he heard me singing and wanted to see how high my voice could go. When he said that, I wasn't afraid. He smiled softly, but his eyes were empty. I didn't understand then, but now I know. He looked at me like he was choosing an object he planned to take." A long silence washed through the room as she spoke. Claire continued, her voice trembling but steady. "He asked if I wanted to go to his recording room. He said I could sing there, record music there, that his microphone was much nicer than the one at camp. The way he spoke sounded like he was telling a fairy tale. Then he started humming that tune. That line of his. No higher than the wind, no lower than the ash." Claire paused, breathing unevenly. Back then it felt like I was hypnotized. Something in his voice made me unable to think. I stood up, nearly followed him. But my grandmother came early that day, calling me from a distance. Claire pressed her lips together, emotion gathering in her eyes. When she saw him standing next to me, she grabbed my shoulders hard and pulled me behind her. She said to him, "Don't come near my granddaughter." I remember his face. Not angry, not surprised, just disappointed. as if someone had snatched away a belonging he believed he had every right to claim. The next day, 2 children from my group disappeared. One boy was found in the woods. The girl... Claire's voice broke, and she couldn't say the rest. Paul lowered his head. He knew too well how the children taken by Bishop ended. Claire looked up, guilt and anger flickering together in her eyes. I thought I was just lucky, but I wasn't. My grandmother heard him humming. She said there was something in his voice that made adults shiver, even though children found it warm. That was how he lured them. Music, songs that sounded harmless. Jasmine wrote quickly into her notebook. Her face tightened. So he didn't just use words, he used sound to build trust. Claire nodded, her hand drifting unconsciously to her throat. I think that's why I became a prodigy. I just wanted to sing without being afraid. But all these years, whenever someone hums even a wrong note from the tune he used, my heart still clenches. I never forget. Eli sat beside her, his voice gentle but unshakable. You survived because you were strong, not because of luck. Claire looked at him, her eyes brimming. I ran from him for years, convincing myself he disappeared. But now I understand. He never left my life. He just waited for the right moment to come back. Paul stepped to the map, his finger touching one of the red pins. You fought to escape him once. Now you're helping us keep him from doing this to these children. Claire inhaled sharply, her shoulders trembling under the weight of emotion long buried. I'll do whatever it takes. Even if the past terrifies me to the point my hands shake, I would rather face it than let someone else become who I was back then. Eli held her gaze for a long moment, and in that silence he recognized that she was no longer just the surviving child. She was someone who had walked out of the dark, carrying wounds that still hurt, but a heart that still refused to die. She was the only child who had ever slipped out of Bishop's grasp. And now, she would help them stop him, because this time, Claire was not fighting alone. The phone in Sarah's kitchen rang just as Troy was reviewing the camera grid. The sudden sound cut through the heavy air, causing everyone to look up. Eli's eyes narrowed instinctively. Only a few specific people knew that number. Sarah hurried over and picked up, but after only a few seconds her face drained of color. She handed the receiver to Eli. You need to take this. Eli pressed it to his ear, his voice low and steady. This is Eli. On the other end came muffled sobs, ragged breaths, a woman trying to speak through panic. Mr. Walker, is that you? They told me to call you. If something urgent happened, if the police couldn't help. Eli straightened, his heartbeat slowing in that familiar way it did when a storm was about to break. I'm listening. What happened? The woman's voice fractured through tears. My daughter, my little girl Ava, she's gone. Sarah covered her mouth, her eyes wide. Claire froze as if struck in the chest. Jasmine tightened her grip on her notebook, and Paul stood as if he had heard a death sentence. Eli kept his tone calm, each word steady, though the tension in his face was unmistakable. Tell me everything, one detail at a time. How old is Ava? 8. She's 8. She just finished her art class. I called her, but she didn't answer. They said she left the class at 6, but it's 7 now and she's not home. I looked everywhere. I asked everyone. No one saw her. Her voice broke. I found her backpack, thrown near the parking lot. It was open. The room fell into an icy stillness. Claire covered her mouth, tears rising instantly. Eli continued, his voice dropping further, sharp as cold iron. Did anyone suspicious appear? Any unfamiliar cars? Anyone watching her? The mother's voice shook violently. I don't know. I only saw a gray car speeding away when I ran up. Troy's head snapped toward the screen, his hands moving instinctively to pull up the nearest camera feeds. What color car? Eli repeated. Silver gray. I didn't catch the plate, but it drove like someone was chasing it. That's all I remember. Please help me. Eli closed his eyes for one beat, then opened them, and the look he carried was that of a blade drawn from its sheath. We will find your daughter, but you must follow everything I say. Lock your doors. Don't open for anyone. Police will come for your statement, but I will send someone to you first. Stay inside. Do you understand? The woman cried her gratitude before the call dropped under the weight of her panic. When Eli set the phone down, no one spoke. They didn't need to. Troy rotated the monitor toward them. The footage from outside the art class filled the screen. 6:43, the gray car appeared at the curb. 6:45, Ava walked out, her pink backpack bouncing on her shoulders. 6:46, the car rolled back, the window lowering slightly. Ava slowed, turning her head, as if someone had called her name. 6:47. The car slipped past the corner. Ava vanished from the frame. Troy zoomed the image, his jaw tight. Same car, same blurred plate, same operating hours. Claire turned away, tears spilling uncontrollably. Everything was happening again. Eli stood motionless before the screen, his body rigid like a dark monument carved from fury and grief. But when he spoke, his voice was terrifyingly calm. The hunt has started again, and this time, he does not get to touch another child. The air inside the Haven Project war room felt as if it had been sucked clean out of the space when Troy rewound the footage once more, enlarging each frame until the pixels warped as he tried to drag out even the smallest hidden detail. There was no face, no readable license plate, no identifying marks beyond the gray car and the familiar movements of the predator manipulating an entire city from the shadows. Eli stood behind Troy, arms crossed, his stare locked so intensely on the screen it looked as though he was trying to force it to confess what it refused to show. But what chilled him was not in the footage. It lived in the mother's trembling voice as she described the backpack torn open, in the way the car eased back just far enough to keep distance exactly the range that man always chose. In the total disappearance that happened in less than a single minute, Claire sat frozen in her chair, her fingers laced so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She couldn't look away from the video, though each passing second stole a little more air from her lungs. When Ava turned her head and the frame marked 6:46, Claire whispered, her voice so fragile the rest of the room had to still themselves to hear it. He called to her. Jasmine tilted her head. "You're certain?" Claire nodded immediately. The way she turned, that's not surprise. She recognized that tone. She heard softness in his voice. She thought it was someone she trusted. Eli nodded slowly, the pieces shifting sharply into place in his mind. Troy opened a folder of old reports they had archived from Bishop's past investigation. Yellowed photographs filled the screen, lollipops dropped near abduction sites, small amusement park tickets given out at a fair, childish notes scrawled on colored paper. Paul picked up one of the printed files, his voice cracked by wounds left unhealed for decades. 20 years ago, every child who vanished left behind the same signs: candy, a promise of free games, a note saying they were going somewhere better. He hasn't changed his pattern. Jasmine laid a sheet on the table, her finger tapping a handwritten line from the earliest victim report. He told them about a peaceful house where no one yelled, where no one hit them, where they could sleep without fear. Claire grabbed the arms of her chair, her breath locking in her chest. That's what he told me. That day, when he tried to take me. Eli turned to her instantly. What exactly did he say? Claire swallowed hard, then repeated the words in a trembling voice that tightened the hearts of everyone in the room. He said, he had a house where children didn't have to cry, where music played all day, where no one would ever be angry, where everything was good. Troy flipped to another old page, and his face darkened. Here, a rescued child described the same line, word for word. Paul stood still, his hands shaking slightly. So he's repeating it. Exactly, step by step. No changes, no evolution, just the same script. Jasmine spoke under her breath, her voice like wind slipping through a cracked window. Because he thinks no one remembers anymore. Claire shut her eyes briefly, then opened them, her gaze wet but sharper. That's him. I know it. The way he lures with gentle promises, the way he makes children believe he's harmless, the music, the games, the peaceful place. No one else does that. No one else has that voice. Troy pulled up 4 new surveillance clips, arranged in a grid. Each showed a different child in an area Bishop had been scouting. In each one, the same gray car appeared, moving with the same slow, measured pace, watching, assessing, but not drawing attention. The same pattern, the same hunting method, the same strategy. Claire pointed at the screens, speaking faster as her fear sharpened into clarity. He's testing them the same way he tested me. The only difference is, he's not alone this time. Eli looked at the map on the wall where red pins clustered around the abandoned building. Each pin marked a time, a location, a child being watched without knowing. Each pin was a child who might already be in his sights. Eli exhaled slowly, his voice sinking into a truth none of them wanted to hear. The pattern from 20 years ago is returning piece by piece. Troy returned to his keyboard. If he's rebuilding his operation, he'll need a holding place, helpers, vehicles, a transport plan, Paul added quietly. And time, which means Ava's kidnapping isn't the first move, just the opening. Claire hugged her arms tightly, shivering. Then, how long before he does it again? Eli lifted his head, his eyes cold and metallic. Not long, but long enough for us to stop him, because now we finally understand what no one understood 20 years ago. This isn't impulse. This isn't madness. This is a pattern. And that pattern repeats like a sick promise from the monster who made it. Claire looked at Eli, her voice barely a breath. It's Nathan Bishop, no one else, Eli answered slowly, each word dropping heavy as a hammer against wood. I know, and now everything is unfolding exactly the way he once did it. But this time, we won't let him finish, because someone who survived him is here to expose him, and because the war from 20 years ago never actually ended. Eli left Haven Project just past midnight. Graybridge lay under a thin veil of fog, and the streetlights glowed in blurred halos across the wet pavement. He drove alone to the outskirts of the city, to an old storage yard where rusted containers sat stacked like abandoned iron graves. Almost no one knew this place, but one man always did. Owen Harper, a former detective who had been Eli's only ally during the darkest years of the Bishop investigation. Harper had risked his badge, nearly lost it to feed Eli information back when the system had failed them both. Harper's car was already parked in the shadows, lights off, a cigarette ember glowing faintly. Eli approached, his boots hitting the damp concrete with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. Harper stepped out when Eli was only a few feet away. Time had carved deeper lines into his face and salted his hair with gray, but his eyes still carried the alertness of an old wolf. You wouldn't call me at this hour unless it was for one reason, he said, voice roughened by smoke. And I hope it's not the reason I'm thinking. Eli didn't soften it. Nathan Bishop is back. Harper froze. The cigarette dropped, dying quietly under his shoe. After a long moment, Harper released a breath that sounded like a stone falling in a deep well. Are you sure? Eli looked him dead in the eye. Claire Bennett heard his voice. Ava Coleman was taken. The old pattern is repeating. I'm sure. Harper cursed under his breath and pressed his fingers to the bridge of his nose. 20 years. 20 years I prayed that name would never surface again. And now you're telling me he's back like he never left? Elijah, you do realize if this gets out, the whole city will panic? Eli's voice hardened. Good. They should know a monster has returned. Harper's stare sharpened. No. They need proof, procedure, law, and you want to do things the way you did back then. Eli said nothing, but the look in his eyes held every truth Harper feared. The law had failed before. Harper stepped closer, lowering his voice. I remember you back then. A reckless kid willing to die just to find his sister. I covered for you, hid files. Let you do things I couldn't as a cop. But Eli, this is different. You're not that lost kid anymore. You have a community, a responsibility, a network, and if you cross the line again, this time you won't just be investigated. You'll be prosecuted. Eli looked down at the wet concrete, then lifted his eyes, carrying the weight of 20 years of ghosts. And what about the children? The ones like Sarah? Like Ava? Who protects them if Bishop knows every crack in the system? Who saves them while we wait for permission? Harper's jaw tightened. I'm not saying do nothing. I'm saying, if you step too far, no one will be able to shield you. No one. Not from court, not from the media, not from federal investigators. You'll lose everything, Eli replied quietly, with the resolve of a man who had buried fear long ago. If I stand still, children lose everything. Harper closed his eyes for a beat, then opened them, searching Eli's face for any trace of hesitation. He found none, only a fire he thought had long been extinguished. Finally, Harper sighed, but his voice softened. I'll help you, as far as I can. But Eli, if you go back into that darkness, there's no coming out this time. Eli nodded, his lips tightening. I never planned to come back. I only move forward. Harper placed a hand on his shoulder, a brief, heavy gesture between men who had once walked the same nightmarish path. Find him before he finds another child. But please, Elijah, don't make me arrest you. Eli turned and walked toward his truck, his silhouette fading into the fog as if stepping onto a road he had always known he would return to. And when he opened the door, Harper's warning echoed like thunder across a silent night. If you get involved, this time they'll treat you like a criminal. Eli gripped the steering wheel, but his voice inside held only one answer. Then I'll be the kind of criminal monsters are afraid of. When Eli returned to the Haven Project, the atmosphere inside the building was nothing like it had been when he left. The clicking of Troy's keyboard and the sound of Jasmine calling the community support stations had vanished, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed down on the lungs. Sarah ran toward him with a pale face and red, swollen eyes. as if she had just witnessed something no one should ever have to see again. Eli felt the danger in the air before a single word was spoken. "What happened?" Sarah tried to steady herself, but her voice cracked like something fragile about to shatter. "Elijah, we're being watched." Eli froze in the middle of the hallway, every muscle tightening. "Who's watching us?" Sarah swallowed hard, lips trembling. "Bishop. He knows Claire is alive." The silence that followed was so suffocating that Eli could hear the slow, heavy drum of his own heartbeat. Claire stood behind Sarah, her hands clenched so tightly the knuckles had gone white, her face drained of color, but her eyes holding not just fear, no, it was the terror of someone who knew exactly what kind of monster was staring back at her from the dark. Eli stepped closer. "How do you know?" Troy ran out of the monitoring room carrying a tablet. He handed it to Eli, his voice strangled in his throat. The camera behind Haven caught something. He was there. Eli looked at the screen, and a coldness slid down the length of his spine. Under a dim street lamp, blurred by mist and distance, a shadow stood just far enough to avoid a clear image, a hood pulled low, his face drowned in darkness, but the posture unmistakable. One hand tucked into a pocket, the other slightly raised, as though listening for something only he could hear. Claire took one glance and gripped the arm of the chair beside her. He's singing. I know it even if I can't hear it." Eli looked closer, and she was right, his shoulders moved with the subtle cadence of someone humming to himself. Claire's breathing quickened, her hand flying to her chest as if to keep her heart from tearing free. "He wants me to see him. He wants me to know he's here." Sarah turned away, hands gripping her head, her voice breaking. "I thought this place was safe. I thought Haven Project would be where children would finally be protected. And now," Troy cut in, his tone tight. "Sarah, there's more." Another video appeared on the screen. The hallway camera on Haven's second floor. Timestamp: 2 hours before Eli returned. The footage at first showed nothing unusual: bright lights, a few staff members walking by. Then the camera caught the door to room 8. Temporary shelter for a little girl brought in only the night before, after her mother found a strange man following the child home from school. In the video, the girl stepped out for only a moment, walking into the hallway to look for the on-duty staff member. 5 seconds later, the lights flickered once. The feed cut. When it came back, the hallway was empty. The child was gone. No scream, no stranger in frame, no signs of struggle, no trace. A cold, controlled anger rose inside Eli like a storm waking from a long sleep. How did he get inside? Sarah collapsed into a chair, gripping her hair, her voice shattering. The system was breached remotely. He didn't just cut the power, he masked the sensors to look like a system reboot. The magnetic locks were disabled for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. While we were staring at frozen screens thinking it was a glitch, that was all the time he needed to slip in, silence her, and vanish without a trace. Jasmine stood against the wall, hand over her mouth, tears spilling despite her efforts to contain them. No one said it out loud, but they all understood it instantly. Bishop had walked straight into the place they believed was impenetrable. Claire moved to Sarah's side, knelt, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sarah, listen. This isn't your fault." But Sarah shook her head violently, a sob tearing loose. "She came here to be safe, Claire. This was the only place I promised her mother nothing would happen. And now," Claire tightened her grip, her voice stronger than it had ever been, "we don't fall apart. That's what he wants. He wants you broken. He wants us hopeless. But we're not giving him that. Not this time." Eli watched the two women clinging to each other in the middle of the storm, and he knew this was Bishop's true intent. He didn't just take a child. He shattered trust. He wanted to prove that safety was an illusion, that the Haven Project was nothing more than a cracked shield. But Claire rose to her feet, turned to the room, her eyes glowing with both fear and fury. "He knows I'm alive, but I know his pattern. He thinks he has the advantage. But this time, he's wrong." Eli nodded once, slowly, then spoke in a voice grounded in iron. "If he wants a war, we take the war straight to wherever he's hiding. Haven may have a hole in its wall, but our line of defense has never been stronger." And in that moment, despair became determination. Loss became purpose. Because the moment Bishop stepped into their safest place, he had declared war. And no one at Haven had any intention of surrendering. Not now. Not ever. The meeting room still echoed with the panic from hours before. But there was no time left for fear. Troy pored over the map again. Jasmine rechecked every satellite location, and Paul guarded the door, as if he could tackle Bishop himself should the man dare to appear. Eli leaned against the table, arms crossed, head bowed. A child had been taken inside their own territory. Bishop had slipped through every layer of protection they'd built. Anger and guilt twisted through Eli's chest like a windstorm of old wounds clawing their way back to life. Before he could speak, Claire rose from her chair. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady, sharp, unshakable. "I want to be part of this." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Sarah spun around. "No, absolutely not. Eli, she is just a child. We cannot use a 12-year-old as bait. I'm not letting you walk into his line of sight again." Claire held her gaze calmly. "I've been in his line of sight for 20 years, Sarah. He knows I'm alive. He knows I recognized his voice. He called to me from the dark. I can't hide anymore." Eli straightened, his voice a slab of stone. "No, he wants you scared. He wants you running. If you walk into this hunt now, he'll use you as bait." Claire stepped closer, unflinching. "I'm not bait. I'm the only one here who knows exactly how he talks, how he sings, how he lures. I remember details no adult saw. I'm a living witness." Troy lifted his head from the monitors, considering. "She's right." Jasmine nodded slowly. "Bishop fixates on the ones who got away. Claire might help us predict his next move." Paul crossed his arms, studying Claire as though testing her strength. "The question is, can you handle it?" Claire met his eyes. "I survived him through my entire childhood. I tried so hard to learn music correctly because he once used it as bait. I've been running, hiding, pretending he was gone. But he never died. He just waited. And I've been waiting too for a chance to end this." Sarah rushed to her, grabbing her hand, voice cracking with terror. "Claire, you don't understand. He doesn't just hunt children. He hunts souls. He crushes wills. If you step out there, he'll erase you." Claire embraced Sarah, holding her tight. "I do understand, but I also know that if we do nothing, another child will vanish. And another, and someday, I'll watch the news announce another missing kid lured away by a voice soft as molasses. And I won't survive that." Eli stepped forward, his voice low and heavy. "No. End of discussion. You're not joining." Troy looked up. "Eli, she's the key," Jasmine added quietly. "He's watching her. He wants her. If we understand why." Paul moved closer to Claire, nodding. "This girl survived Bishop through sheer will. Don't underestimate that." Eli turned sharply, a flare of anger lighting his eyes. "We all know what he wants. Control. Replication. He wants to prove he still owns the game. And you want to throw Claire back into it?" Claire didn't flinch. "I want to end it." Eli stared at her for a long, punishing moment. His shoulders sagged under the weight of 2 decades of failure and ghosts he could never outrun. At last he exhaled, a long, worn-down release of breath. "Fine." Claire froze. Sarah's mouth fell open. But Eli raised a hand before anyone could speak. "You join under conditions. First, you never go anywhere alone. Sarah stays with you at all times. Second, you wear a Haven tracker. No removing it, no turning it off, no losing signal. Third, the moment you feel unsafe, you tell us." Claire nodded without hesitation. "I agree." Sarah turned to Eli, her voice breaking. "Are you sure?" Eli looked at Claire for a long beat before answering. "She's not the 11-year-old kid running through the woods anymore. She's the only one who ever caused Bishop to fail. And he knows it." Claire drew a steady breath, her eyes shining not with fear but with readiness. "Then let's begin. This isn't the past coming back. This is the final fight. And this time, she wasn't running. She was walking straight toward the monster." Troy returned to the operations room with a face drawn as tight as a wire, carrying a freshly printed stack of documents and a tablet still glowing with lines of code and satellite maps. The whole room fell silent at once, every pair of eyes turning toward him. "I found it." Those 2 words made Eli straighten, his shoulders locking as if he had just heard the first drumbeat of a long-awaited war. Troy set the tablet on the table, opened the map, and zoomed in on an area on the western edge of Graybridge, the old warehouse complex on Northwick Road, about 3 miles from downtown. 3 signals and a coded transmission repeated exactly 3 times over the past 4 days. Paul stared at the transport diagram, his expression darkening. "They're preparing to move. Same pattern as 20 years ago," Jasmine added while scrolling through satellite logs. 1 mid-sized truck, 1 cargo van, and 2 cars moving on separate schedules but all converging toward Northwick on Tuesday night. Behind them, Claire clasped her hands, her fingers trembling as she studied the markings on the map. "Tuesday night, that's less than 2 days." Troy nodded firmly. "And it's the only time their schedules sync. This isn't a test run. This is the real move. Eli leaned both hands on the table, head bowed for a few seconds as if calculating every possible step. When he lifted his gaze, something cold and honed gleamed in his eyes, a blade sharpened over 2 decades. We intercept them at Northwick. They do not leave the city. Paul exhaled sharply. So it's an ambush. Jasmine frowned. We only get 1 shot. If we're off by even a second, they scatter and disappear again. Eli's voice remained steady. There is no second time. Claire stepped forward. They're bringing the children there? Troy pointed at a yellow-marked corner of the map. 2 camera outages around the warehouse. Hard cuts. That only happens when someone's clearing a route for transport. Paul checked the road layout. 2 exit points. 1 old road leading to the highway. 1 cutting through the abandoned industrial strip. Perfect spot to vanish within minutes. Jasmine crossed her arms. If they load the kids onto those vehicles, we lose. Eli nodded. So we strike before the first wheel leaves the concrete. Claire looked at the map for a long moment before turning to Eli. What's the plan? Eli motioned for Troy to pull up the tactical model he and Paul had built from old data. The large screen displayed the Northwick complex. Entrances, blind spots, rusted containers blocking sightlines, dark pockets Bishop could use to hide. Troy pointed to the rear side door. This is the weak point. No camera, no guard. 20 years ago, Bishop always used the side exit to load kids into a small truck. If he repeats the pattern, he'll use this door, Claire whispered. Eli circled the area on the map. Paul, you and your team block the side exit. No one gets past you. Paul nodded. I'll bring 3 men who know the industrial strip blindfolded. Samuel, Torres, and Levi. Nothing gets through. Eli turned to Jasmine. You block the front gate. Just keep the vehicles from leaving. Don't need to catch the drivers. Just stop them. Jasmine smirked. I'll park a truck sideways. If anything charges the gate, I'll shove it back where it came from. Troy would coordinate from the command vehicle, tracking movement and calling out real-time changes. Then Eli looked at Claire. And you. Sarah rushed forward, afraid of what he might say. Eli, you cannot put her in that place. But Claire stood firm. I won't be anywhere near the warehouse. But I can identify his presence if he's inside. I know how he hums, how he taps his foot, how he breathes when he's focused on a child. No one else would notice, but I will. Eli inhaled deeply. You and Sarah stay in the monitor vehicle, 1 block away. You keep the tracker on at all times, no stepping out, nowhere near the building. Claire nodded instantly. I agree. Paul looked around at them. This is the deciding strike. If we're wrong. Eli cut him off. We're not wrong, not this time. His gaze drifted over the map, to the red dots marking children still trapped in the dark. Not just Ava, others, lost, waiting for someone to come. He clenched his fist. Tuesday night. 1 chance, 1 ambush. Bishop believed he could return unnoticed. He believed no one remembered the old pattern. He was wrong. And this time, the door he chose for escape would be the door that buries him. Tuesday night arrived under a sky thick with clouds, the wind slicing through the industrial district like a warning meant for anyone with a weak heart. The Northwick warehouses sat silent, swallowed by the abandoned zone, the dim streetlights painting half-erased strokes across cracked pavement. From a distance, Haven's convoy parked behind a row of rusted containers. Everyone stepped out in silence, no unnecessary sounds, no wasted breath. Paul signaled his team to fan out to their positions. Jasmine parked her truck at the corner, ready to slam it into place the moment the escape route opened. In the surveillance van, Troy powered up his computer, connecting the drone hovering 40 meters above. Sarah sat beside him, eyes fixed on the feed. Claire sat in the back seat, gripping her headphones, her heartbeat pounding against her ribs. Outside, Eli stood before the warehouse's corroded front door, earpiece in place, every line in his body pulled taut. He lifted his face to the sky for a single breath, then whispered, "Go." The signal echoed across all positions. Paul's trio moved toward the side entrance, hiding behind stacks of rotting pallets. Jasmine switched on her truck's interior lights to look like a stalled delivery vehicle. The drone drifted overhead, sweeping windows, doors, shadows. On Troy's screen, figures came into view. 3 men moving crates toward the back exit. Another stood in a corner, one hand near his ear, head tilted as if listening to his own breath. Claire froze. "Stop the frame," Troy obeyed. Claire leaned forward, goosebumps rising across her skin. That's him." Sarah glanced at her. "Are you sure?" Claire nodded without hesitation. "The way he tilts his head, the way his shoulders dip with the rhythm. He's humming. His voice drops every time he counts the beats. That's him, Nathan Bishop. Eli's eyes hardened when the name came through the earpiece. He clenched his fist, then quietly signaled Paul. Target confirmed. Hold for command. The drone swept deeper, and then a metal door cracked open inside the warehouse. A yellow light spilled through, illuminating the pale face of a little girl, Ava. Her wrists bound with plastic ties, her mouth taped, her eyes wide and wet with terror. Claire inhaled sharply, nails digging into her palms. Behind Ava, 5 more children, huddled together, trembling, their eyes dull with fear and exhaustion. Sarah covered her mouth, a small sob escaping. The van fell silent. Eli stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. That's enough. His voice cut through every channel like a blade. All units, positions, 3, 2, 1, move. Paul and his men charged the side door, locking chains around the handle within seconds. Jasmine slammed her truck into place across the front gate, tires screeching. Inside, the warehouse lights flickered. The guards panicked. And then Eli kicked the front door open, the crash of metal echoing like thunder. He entered with his shoulders squared, eyes burning with the fire of a man who had spent half his life chasing a ghost. One guard lunged, but Paul was already there, pulling him down like a predator striking its mark. A second fled toward the gate, only to be knocked sideways when Jasmine shoved the truck into his path, slamming him onto the concrete. In the darkness of the surveillance van, Claire heard it, the quiet, dreadful humming she had never forgotten. The sound her ears once begged to unhear. He was moving toward the children. He was singing. Claire shouted into the mic, "Eli, he's heading for the steel door. He's trying to move them now." Without hesitation, Eli sprinted down the dark hallway, weaving between crates. And then he saw him. Nathan Bishop stood at the steel door, one hand on the lock, the other tapping out the rhythm of the song he murmured under his breath, as if playing a private lullaby. When he turned, the yellow light carved his face from the shadows, the face that had haunted an entire city. Eli stopped, breath heavy, standing at the edge of everything he had chased for 2 decades. Bishop smiled softly, almost warmly. "Elijah Walker, it's been so long." Eli's voice emerged low and crushed stone. "This ends tonight, Bishop." Bishop tilted his head, pale eyes gleaming with a sick delight. "No, tonight is the beginning." Eli lunged. Bishop stepped back. 2 men carrying 2 histories collided in the darkest corner of Graybridge, and the night of the raid became the moment Eli finally confronted the monster he had chased across half a lifetime. Only this time, he was not here to chase. He was here to end it. Nathan Bishop was forced into the farthest corner of the warehouse, his back pressed against the cold wall, his hands still damp with sweat, yet his eyes carried the calmness of a man who believed he could never be touched. Eli stood facing him, breath heavy, his fist clenched so tightly the knuckles had turned white, and though he had imagined this moment countless times throughout his life, now that it was truly happening, it felt nothing like he had expected. It was not relief. It was not release. It was simply every wound he had locked away for 2 decades breaking open all at once. Paul was handcuffing the last 2 men, and Jasmine guarded the entrance to ensure no one slipped out. Sarah was leading the children outside, each of them trembling yet clinging to her hands as if she were the last thread connecting them to life. And Eli and Bishop stood alone in a small pool of darkness where no light could reach. Bishop looked at Eli, his head tilting slightly, his voice low and soft as though he were simply making conversation. "You came late. If you had come earlier, even just a few minutes, you would not have seen the children frightened like that." Eli stepped closer, his eyes burning red. "Be quiet." Bishop only sighed softly, almost pitying. "You do not understand, Elijah. I did nothing wrong. I gave those children a better place to live, a place without yelling, without violence, without poverty. I only took them away from a cruel world." A bitter laugh caught in Eli's throat, strangled until it became a growl. "A better place?" Bishop smiled, his gaze empty like still water. "Children need a guide. They need affection. They need music. I gave them everything." Eli stood frozen, unable to comprehend the sickness in his words. Memories surged through him, sharp as glass. Sarah lying unconscious in the hospital, the children found in the dark, and the names that were never called again in school. Rage flared through him like an uncontainable fire. He lunged forward, grabbed Bishop by the collar and slammed him against the wall. Skin met concrete with a dull thud, yet Bishop kept smiling, his lips curling as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Yes, Do it. You are no different from me." Eli raised his fist, his hand trembling with hatred and with 20 years of pain pressing down on him. Troy and Paul were escorting the children out, but hearing the crash, they turned back. Sarah, standing a few yards away, cried out, her voice tight with terror. "Elijah, stop!" But Eli no longer heard anything. All he saw was the man before him, the man who had stolen the childhood of too many, who had shattered Sarah, who had carved a wound into Eli that had never healed. His fist hovered inches from Bishop's face. Bishop whispered, his voice soft as velvet and poisonous as venom. "Kill me, Elijah, and then you become me. You would be no different." At that moment, small arms wrapped tight around Eli's waist. Claire buried her face in his coat, sobbing, "Please, Uncle Eli, don't be a monster like him. You promised to keep us safe." Her voice was hoarse. "No, he has to live." Eli turned to her, his vision blurring with anguish. Claire shook her head, tears spilling but her voice clear enough to cut through the darkness around them. "He has to live so others can see the truth, so every victim knows he is no longer a ghost, so the court can see him, so the entire city can see he is not a legend, not someone untouchable, but a sick man who will face the consequences." Eli's breath trembled, his fist still poised just inches away from Bishop's skin. Claire tightened her grip. "If you kill him, everything we did tonight will vanish. The children will become a stain on the record. Haven will be shut down, and he will become the victim in the eyes of the law." Bishop remained silent, but for the first time, his smile faltered. Claire continued, voice breaking yet strong, "Do not let him take anything more from us. Not honor, not peace, not your freedom, not the children's future." Eli closed his eyes. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then he lowered his hand. Paul immediately tackled Bishop to the ground and locked the cuffs tight. This time Bishop did not smile. Sarah ran to Claire and pulled her into her arms, while Eli stumbled back, gasping like someone who had just stepped away from the deepest edge of a cliff. Claire watched as Bishop was dragged away, her eyes bright, not with triumph but with the realization that the ghost had finally taken a human shape. No longer an invisible fear, no longer a whisper in the night, just a broken man who would be pulled into the light. And because of that one moment, the children were saved, and she herself reclaimed something Bishop had stolen from her long ago, the right to live without trembling at a voice singing in the dark. Morning rose over Graybridge as though the city had awakened from a long nightmare. Ambulances lined up, paramedics carrying each child out of the warehouse. Every one of them was trembling, their eyes vacant yet alive. Still alive. Claire stood at the edge of the scene, her hand pressed to her chest as Ava was carried out first. The girl sobbed uncontrollably, but when she saw her mother running toward her from behind a line of officers, clutching the pink backpack still smeared with dirt, they collapsed into each other. The mother wept, repeating "thank you" over and over. Claire stepped toward them, and when the mother looked up and saw her, she rushed to embrace Claire as if holding on to the person who had saved her entire world. Both women cried, unable to form complete sentences. Ava, face streaked with tears, wrapped her small arms around Claire's legs. Claire knelt and held them both, feeling a piece of her heart, the piece stolen 20 years ago, returned to her. Camera flashes erupted as the news spread. Haven Project, working alongside underground networks, rescued 6 children from a kidnapping ring. The suspect, Nathan Bishop, has been captured. A case buried for 2 decades shakes Graybridge once again. Bishop's face was photographed as he was escorted away, his empty eyes washed in white camera light. He was no longer the shadow haunting the city. He was a criminal in handcuffs. But as reporters flocked toward Haven Project, Eli was nowhere to be seen. While Paul and Jasmine spoke to the police, Eli slipped away quietly, as though he did not belong in the brightness. Only in the years of darkness where he had fought alone. Claire stepped out of the warehouse looking for him, but only found an empty space. Sarah approached, wiping her tears, and said softly, "He went home." Claire did not need to ask where. The familiar establishment on Franklin Street, where Eli had rebuilt his life after losing everything, where Haven Project began from nothing, where he tried to make amends for the children the system had abandoned. When Claire pushed open the door, the familiar chime rang. Inside was the scent of warm coffee, soft golden light, and Eli's silhouette behind the counter as he slowly wiped the espresso machine. Neither spoke. Claire stood there for a long moment, looking at a man who seemed to have aged years in a single night. Eli paused but did not turn. Eventually he spoke, his voice low and tired. "It is done." Claire stepped closer. "No, This is only the beginning. He sighed and set the cloth down. Since Bishop was captured, people saw Eli as a hero. But Eli felt no such thing. He felt hollow. 20 years chasing a shadow. 20 years building Haven to make up for what happened to Sarah. 20 years stepping into darkness to drag a child back into the light. The shadow was gone now, and Eli no longer knew where to go. Claire approached and leaned on the counter beside him, her eyes filled with gratitude and understanding. You did it. The children lived. Sarah is still here. Haven still stands. And I am alive because of you. Eli looked at her, his gaze softening. You are brave, kid. Braver than I was at your age. You pulled me back when I was about to lose myself again. Claire smiled gently. You did not lose anything. You finally regained the one thing you thought Bishop stole from you. Faith. After a long silence, Eli turned on the machine, poured a coffee for himself and a hot chocolate for Claire. Her hands still trembled as she accepted it. They stood together in a warm, quiet stillness, listening to the soft hum of the cafe equipment, the passing cars outside, the city breathing normally again after a night of chaos. Haven continued, but Eli withdrew from direct operations. He passed those responsibilities to Sarah, Troy, and Jasmine. He returned to his cafe, the place he belonged, where time moved slower, and where he could watch children run past the window without feeling dread grip his throat. Even though Bishop was locked away, Eli still looked toward the window whenever a gust of wind passed, as if making sure the darkness was truly gone. Claire left the cafe that afternoon, but before stepping outside, she turned back to him. We are not losing any more, Uncle Eli. Everyone was saved. He nodded gently. Yes, the storm has passed. Yet deep inside he knew the truth. People like Claire were the ones who brought back the light, not him. Outside, the city buzzed with news. Citizens breathed easier, but inside the small cafe, the man who had carried 2 decades of darkness finally allowed himself a single quiet breath in the fragile piece newly stitched together, like the sky after a storm, thin but just a little brighter, and that was enough for him. 6 months passed after the Northwick night, and Greybridge slowly reclaimed a peace no one believed would ever return. Claire continued working with Haven, but her spirit felt lighter. The darkness no longer clung to her like a second shadow. One early autumn morning, after making her first cup of coffee for the day, she heard the soft clink of her mailbox outside. Inside was a cream envelope decorated with childlike star doodles. On the corner, written in careful handwriting, to Claire. She smiled without meaning to, carried the envelope inside and opened it. Inside was a page filled with drawings of flowers, sunlight, and a little girl with pigtails. In the center were the words, written with a slightly shaky hand. When I sing now, I remember your face. The innocence of the sentence pierced something deep in Claire's heart. She remembered Ava as she had been found in that cold, dark room, her eyes dull with terror, and now the girl could sing without trembling, without darkness pulling her back. And most overwhelming of all was the fact that Ava thought of her during moments of joy. As though Claire had become a tiny beacon in the child's darkest days, she folded the letter and pressed it to her chest. In the past 6 months, Haven Project had received dozens of new stories, and many children had found safety. For the first time, Claire felt she was no longer merely a survivor. She had become part of the light she once longed for. After slipping the letter into her bag, she put on her coat and stepped outside. The crisp autumn air wrapped around her gently. On the small street, sunlight streamed through the leaves that had turned gold and orange. When she reached Franklin Street, she heard a soft laugh. Through the cafe window, she saw Eli behind the counter, leaning down to show a boy no older than 8 how to hold a milk pitcher so it would not spill. He moved slowly, patiently, as though it were a sacred ritual rather than a simple lesson. The boy giggled whenever the milk frothed too much, and Eli laughed with him, his eyes lit with a tenderness few had ever seen before. Sarah sat at a table near the door, sipping coffee and watching them with pride. It was a scene that none of them could have imagined 6 months earlier. A man who once stood between life and death, who once carried the bitterness of 2 decades, now teaching a child how to make a cappuccino. No crying, no darkness, no endless chases, only life. Claire pushed open the door, the familiar chime ringing, and Eli looked up, a rare smile crossing his face. The girl sent you the letter, did she not? Claire simply held it up. Eli nodded, his expression softening beautifully. He took much from us, but this is what we took back. She sat down, watching him gently guide the boy's hands, and felt the weight inside her lift completely. Every person carries a wound. What matters is what we choose to do with it. Claire chose to heal others so she could heal herself. Eli chose to teach children to make coffee instead of living in hatred. And Ava chose to sing, remembering the face of the person who helped bring her into the light. And this story, above all else, reminds us that as long as even one person refuses to give up, darkness cannot win forever. Life will always hold moments we cannot predict, moments that make us want to fall apart, but it will also offer small sparks that can change everything. If this story touched something in your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments. What did you see in the journey of Claire, Eli, and the children? What does it remind you of in your own life? We would love to hear from you. And if you wish to continue walking alongside stories filled with emotion, humanity, and meaning, do not forget to subscribe, like, and share so we can bring you more heartfelt stories each day. Thank you for staying until the end. Wishing you good health, peace, joy, and light in every day ahead. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.